Hey guys, this is my first tutorial, so let me know how it goes. If it's terrible, I'll never do these things again, but hopefully you all learn something from it. Lately, I've been seeing a lot of requests for how to do this kind of cinematic color correction in their photography, and in cinema, this is referred to as color grading, whereas color correction is making the colors appear as if they actually did in real life, making grays actually gray and whatnot. Color grading is adding color back in to create a stylized effect. And here you can see that pretty much all the neutral colors and are a little bit more blue than what they should be, and a lot of the warm tones are left alone. And whenever a question is asked how to reproduce this in Photoshop or Lightroom, it's typically recommended to try split toning in Lightroom. What you do is you just add in some color to the shadows and highlights. Typically orange and blue are the most frequently recommended because it's what's used frequently, and I know a lot of people don't like this effect because it's so overused, but it's a real simple way to get a good look. So that's a pretty basic way to achieve it, but in video color grading it's a little bit more complex for the most part, at least for more high-end stuff that they do for cinema. They specifically tone different areas instead of a whole image. Split toning in Lightroom affects everything indiscriminately, so every highlight will get this orange cast. Even if it's a blue highlight, it'll get this orange cast, which is not preferable since they're complementary colors. They kind of cancel each other out and they make a really ugly, muddy color in my opinion. So I'm going to show you a way in Photoshop to reproduce a actual cinematic color grading. It's probably still not as in-depth as what they do for really high-end stuff, but it produces a very close result. So here's the image without any color toning. I just use white balance to bring out the skin tones so they're actually warm. I know it's not the best image, but it should work well for the example here. Basically, the premise of this is to select everything but the warm tones and tone that, and then tone the warm tones separately, so you can apply the blue toning to everything else and then do whatever you want to the warm tones. And to do this, go up to select color range, and from this drop down select the yellows. I find that yellows work best for warm tones. Warm tones typically have more yellows than they do reds. And you hit OK, but there's not a whole lot showing. There's a few little marching ants around here, but it doesn't really look like there's much. So to fix this, go into Quick Mask. The neat thing about Quick Mask is it's a color representation of what you have selected, and since it's a color, you can use image adjustment tools to edit the selection. So if you use levels, you can bring out more of that yellow selection. So just keep bringing it in until you have your warm tones selected. And you'll want to blur it a little bit, just because it's a little sharp and noisy. Maybe a little bit more. You can get it pretty blurred without much of a noticeable effect. And you exit your Quick Mask and you'll have more of a selection to work with. But now, since you have the warm tone selected, you want to tone everything else, so you need to invert the selection. Now that you have the inverse selected, go down and create an adjustment layer, which will create a adjustment layer with that selection as a layer mask. Now you can go in and do your toning. I prefer to use curves for this. You can bring in some blues some reds, so it's not quite as cyan. Maybe decrease the green, no, increasing a little bit too purple. Looks pretty good. Maybe bring in a little bit of blues into the shadows. I think it's still a little too overly blue. Decrease the reds, my mistake. The thing about using the yellow color spectrum when we selected the color earlier is that some of the reds at the end of the yellow spectrum weren't selected, so you'll have to go back in with the brush and the layer mask to correct some of the red tones that may be affected by this blue toning since they weren't selected with the warm yellows earlier. Especially these lips are pretty red. So now you have a toning that affects everything but the warm tones. And if you want to go in and edit the warm tones a little bit, Control or Command click on the layer mask over here and go back and invert the selection and just create your next adjustment layer. I think I'll try color balance for this one. Go into the shadows, probably doesn't need much. A little bit of blues, and some cyan. And there you have it, a way to specifically target certain tones and color ranges of an image and tone those separately. It gives you more fidelity and more accurate color ranges in the end. This way you don't have your toning fighting with the actual colors of your image. You can go back and compare the Photoshop and Lightroom versions. So here we have Photoshop, here we have Lightroom. Prefer the Photoshop version. I think it keeps a lot more of the warm tones, especially in the skin, which we would want to keep them that way. Adding blue to the skin makes it look like it's not quite skin anymore. Unless you want to go for that effect, of course, then by all means do it. I just like to keep skin tones at least skin tone-ish for the most part. It's a pretty far cry from actual cinema color grading, but this is a real quick example. You can, of course, go in and edit the image further, target specific other areas, what have you. This image is probably a bit more reddish in the skin tones, warm tones, and a bit more cyan green in the blues than what I have. There you have it. Hope you learned something. Hope this tutorial didn't go too poorly. Enjoy.